G'day and welcome to Doesn't Matter. We make choices. We make choices all the time. We make decisions all the time. And there's an illusion that most of us have had, in fact, everyone's had at some stage, and most of us retain, unfortunately. And that is that your choice is the result of you, someone else, something else, an organization, body, or individual. And that's it. It's you and whatever you're interacting with, whatever you're interacting with. And it's that dynamic. And we forget really easily because it blends into the background like cameras blend into the background. People are aware of cameras for a little while and then they forget that cameras are there completely. I've worked with cameras and security all my life. I'm always aware of them, but I'm stunned at how quickly people forget that they're even there and act as if they're not there, which is bizarre to me. But nonetheless, it seems to be a very common phenomenon, behavioral phenomenon. It's the same with culture. We make decisions that we think are sovereign and we don't consider the impact of culture, the messages that we receive subliminally as well as more overtly on a daily basis. We receive them as men, as women, as different ethnicities. We receive them in a whole variety of ways for a whole variety of reasons. And we are unaware of those things. They go by the wayside most of the time. We even actively ignore them because we don't think they're relevant to us. And this is the danger zone that I think almost all of us fall into at some stage, and some of us constantly fall into, that we think that we're not influenced by the things that we are influenced by. Culture is one of them. Social forces are tremendously powerful, and we're actually designed to respond to them. Part of our evolutionary response in evolutionary psychology is orientated around what our peers think of us, how we get on with our peers, because our survival was entirely dependent on family and tribe. Otherwise, you just couldn't live, you'd die. So to then say in this much, much safer world where we don't have the existential pressures that we've had for most of our history, and we don't have them much anymore, very few, we've become unaware. We've become comforted by the lack of existential pressure into thinking that we're not rubbing off on each other, so to speak, but we are, and just as much as ever. Just as much as if we were living in Catholic France in the 16th century or pagan Britain during the reign of Boudicca, we're always heavily influenced by that. And I would argue more so because we're not aware of the dogma, the creed, the various algorithms running in our brains, pumped in by all manner of forces. The things that friends have said to us that also reflect that. It's reinforced constantly by friends and family, work colleagues. We're constantly being reminded, TV shows, movies, books, we're constantly being reminded of the contemporary cultural values. And that means that a lot of the decisions we're making unconsciously to a very large degree, and which is consistent with Carl Jung's theorems on the unconscious and the conscious. So many of our decisions seem to be, in neurological studies, seem to be made several seconds before we're consciously aware of them. So there's definitely an awful lot of unconscious work going on. And we have this illusion that we're making conscious choices when often the decision's already been made. What we consciously consider, what we allow into our lives, what we read, what we watch, the conversations we have, all program the unconscious, which does most of the decision making. So in order to understand that and to have some sovereignty over it, some agency over our own minds, we need to understand that you're already making those decisions well before you think you're making them. You're already galvanizing belief well before it manifests even in your life. It's growing like an embryonic structure in your brain through synaptic formations and engrams. You aren't what you think you are, and you're not doing what you think you're doing. becoming conscious of this, becoming aware of this, and engaging in various practices, psychological and philosophical practices, can raise that level of awareness where you start to catch lots and lots of the unconscious processes happening, and you can then make actual thought about, considered decisions on it. So much of what we do is reflexive. So much of what we do is instinctive. So much of what we do is assumptive. And no one really wants to admit it, because it's kind of scary to think how much is operating under the hood that you're not aware of and not even in control of in many cases. It doesn't surprise me that in the time of the greatest safety, greatest surplus and affluence in history, there's never been a better time to be a human being, that we're so unhappy and so socially fucked, so dislocated, so bifurcated, so separated and segregated. It's no surprise at all. And the statistics bear this out. I wish that I was exaggerating, I really do. But we're having a massive crisis, not just a cost of living crisis, but a living with each other crisis. And it's a big one. And it's going to only get worse until we can become more conscious, more aware of how we work as human beings, and how the culture around us that we make a lot of assumptions about and we ignore, like cameras in the background, is constantly working on us, constantly brainwashing us. But it doesn't have to. We can make cultured decisions. We can have agency, but only over the things that we acknowledge. And the resistance that I get when I talk to people about how much of their decision making isn't actually decision making on their part, but largely almost a cultural inference directly into their brains. Let's just say that most people refuse to accept that that's going on for them. They're quite happy to accept that other people are having it, but they refuse to accept it. Most people who know me know that I'm extremely independent thinking. I've been a critical thinker most of my life. And yet I know that it influences me, and a lot. I'm simply, the difference between myself and a person who denies it is I know that it does, and so I know what to look out for. And I'm constantly looking out for new things too, because my picture of my own brain, my own consciousness is incomplete. Probably always will be. So I've got to constantly look out for those things. If we were all doing that, if we were chasing our thoughts and our emotions down the rabbit hole back to where they came from, we were doing that consciously and aware of that, and we weren't allowing culture and social pressure and circumstance and emotion to guide so much of our thinking and build so many of our belief structures in our brains, which then foster more and more of that thinking in a self-reinforcing algorithm, then we would be free. We would be much more free than we are now. We would be much more at peace with each other. We wouldn't have the kind of relational catastrophe that's going on at the moment. We wouldn't have the family breakdowns. We wouldn't have that. Those things would be rare. They would go back to being relatively rare things under extreme circumstances. They wouldn't be the norm the way they are now. And I wouldn't be having to tell young men that you're probably going to be a single dad. That's probably your fate, and you need to make some level of peace with that. That you probably, that's the likelihood at this point in time, and it's been that way for a couple of decades now, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. I would love to be wrong about that. But that's come about among a whole bunch of other things too, our ability to ignore elements of pollution, climate change, all kinds of stuff. It comes about through our ability to ignore stuff that we know is there and is influencing us. So take the time to think about how you assume and what you're assuming, what you're just either ignoring, assuming, or are not even aware of. Are you really as independent in your thinking as you think? Look at your belief structures, analyze them. This is the scary part. You're going to find stuff. Everyone will. Some of you more than others. You're going to find an awful lot of assumption, conflation, an awful lot of programming And you're going to have to unravel it and work out much more consciously what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. And that's going to involve certain practices, meditation, therapy, all kinds of things in order to untangle the knots you want to untangle and strengthen the ones that you do want to strengthen. Making choices. I don't see a lot of choices being made. I see a lot of reactions rather than considered critical choices. So keep that in mind. Focus on it. Be brave. You've got to be brave. If you're not brave, this isn't going to work. You're not going to succeed. Be willing to look at your own skid marks, your own cognitive and emotional and intellectual skid marks. Look at the things you don't want to look at. That's really important. Make yourself uncomfortable for short periods of time and really focus on that. And I promise you, the results are spectacular. Over time, they're spectacular. They will get you through anything. And they will lift your brain and your mind, no matter where your body is. They will lift it to heights. You'll understand so much more. You'll become more forgiving, more loving, more in a whole bunch of ways. Okay? So please, give it a go. Us.